Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome again to ELT Time MENA. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, this is our coffee break style advancing learning podcast series, where for each episode, I'm joined by a guest, an educator who is based right here in MENA, which is the Middle East and North Africa region. And together we will engage in a 30 to 45-minute discussion over a nice cup of tea together on a contemporary topic of their choosing, something that they are experienced in and passionate about. And this is episode 2 of our second season of ELT Time MENA. And today our topic is advancing assessment within the context, hopefully, of the MENA region. And today, for today's discussion, I'm joined by former senior educator from the British Council in Egypt, SARAH Omar. SARAH is CELTA and Delta qualified. She worked at the British Council in Egypt for a number of years, more than 8, I believe. And before that, she also worked in English language teaching for a couple of other places, not courses, and she's worked for Berlitz as well. And she's got experience in, I think, a little bit of everything, teaching, training, administration, producing new courses. She's done both face-to-face and online. So, SARAH, it's afternoon. It is afternoon for you. Good afternoon.
Yes.
Welcome to our ELT Time podcast. We're really happy to have you with us today.
Thank you, Nathan. I'm happy too.
Good. Before we begin, as always, because we name this ELT Time, are you joining us with a cup of tea? Are you a tea drinker?
Not really. I'm a hot chocolate drinker, but at the moment I'm drinking an infusion of herbs. It's something calming and relaxing.
Yeah, good for the immune system, probably. It's kind of herb-based. Yeah, okay. I've got mint and turmeric, which is a bit of an experiment.
That's an interesting blend.
It is an interesting blend. I've not seen it before. For those people who have joined us all the way through season 1, I tried to find a pretty eclectic mix of tea infusions, and this is one that I've managed to find. I haven't tried it before. At the end, I will tell you how it goes.
Okay.
For those of you who are joining us, perhaps on Zoom, are you drinking tea? Are you a tea drinker? If you're joining us on Facebook, I can also see the comments there. So let us know if you are drinking a cup of tea or a cup of coffee as you join us today. Okay, so today's topic is about assessment, and as I mentioned, within the context of the MENA region. So within this very short podcast, we want to, of course, first set the scene. What is assessment? Why is it important? And then thinking a little bit about how we feel about assessment here in MENA. MENA is obviously a very diverse region, so we need to think about context a little bit there. But really, we want to kind of explore where we're at the moment, and perhaps where we might want to be. This is supposed to be a kind of inspirational discussion, thinking kind of about the future. And I think perhaps most importantly, as we get towards the end, we want to think a lot around how we can support students to better achieve in exams. And under that, I guess supporting that is how we can support teachers to ensure that that happens. Before we get into the topic of assessment, though, I did very, very briefly introduce our guest today, which is SARAH, obviously. So my first question to you, SARAH, is actually to get to know you a little bit better, because it was a very brief bio. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into education, what are your main influences, motivations, what kinds of things have you learned along the way?
Okay, great. So I started teaching back in 2010, a long time ago. I've always knew I wanted to teach English, and specifically I was inspired by my primary school teacher. I still remember her until this day. I'm not sure where she is right now, but hopefully if she was alive, I would like to say thank you, because she was a great inspiration. Because she wasn't just a teacher, she taught me how to think, basically. And that's like something you don't get to see a lot in teachers, especially at higher education level and post higher education as well. So I started teaching back in 2010 with Berlitz. They have their own methodology, very communicative. And then after a while, I moved to another place, not very like famous or anything, but they were doing what we call teaching unplugged. They did this as their own. They followed it like that was their method, basically. We didn't use course books. That was the first time for me that I had to create syllabus from scratch. And then at the end of 2013, I did my CELTA at the British Council. And then I joined them a few months later. I started off as a trainee teacher. I took an intensive training for a year, which was full of observations. I learned a lot. I benefited a lot from my mentors and tutors. And then I moved on like the career scale, and I did my ELTea back in 2019. Then I became a higher teacher. Basically, I was teaching, training, mentoring, doing other things, including course development and product development as well. And that's pretty much it.
That's a nice career progression pathway. I find it really interesting that you were really inspired by a previous teacher when you were younger. I just completed the MENA Insights research program here for Macmillan MENA. I haven't completed the report on it yet, but I've got all the findings and I've done the analysis. And actually, this came up a lot, I noticed, because one of the questions that I asked in that survey was, what was your inspiration for becoming a teacher in the first place? Something that's really interesting to me. And that answer actually came up almost more than any other answer. There's a few around kind of, family influences, perhaps parents were teachers before. But even beyond that, people were quite often inspired by a particular teacher that they had when they were a child, which I found really interesting in comparison to, I don't know if I've done that piece of research in the UK or Europe, whether that would be the same or whether that would be different, whether that's a cultural thing.
I think, yeah, you have a point there. I think it might be a cultural thing because we do value our teachers here in Egypt. And like, I think that this is one of the reasons why I wanted to be a teacher, because I wanted to leave an impact in this world. I wanted to think or believe that I had some sort of value. I added value to someone's life. I helped them change the way they think. And that's probably why I'm interested in the field of assessment, because the way people perceive it here is completely different from what I was trying to do. And we're going to come and talk about this in a bit. It's like a big deal. It's a big deal. It's why they are learning in the first place, not for the sake of learning, unfortunately.
Yeah, we'll move on to that in a second, but it's definitely interesting to listen, because it almost sounds like you're giving me a verbal version of many of the answers that I saw in that research, which is great. That there's this this huge feeling of passion and inspiration that came through in the answers that people were giving. In that, a lot of people really feel that that drive to make an impact, change the way students see the world, inspiring them to become better in the future. All of these things came through. So it's really interesting. The other follow-up question I think I'd like to ask is around when you got started, because you took probably a slightly different entry route into classroom teaching, in that you joined the British Council and then you did the one-year training program with them. And as you said, you had a lot of support, you had a lot of classroom observations. There's a kind of very particular program that you go through. Are you, looking back on that, are you glad that you did that rather than just kind of did a 4-week? Because my experience was the other way around. I did 4 weeks and I was kind of chucked into school and abandoned forever. So are you kind of glad looking back that you did it that way?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this program was a way for us to reevaluate our teaching practice post CELTA, because when you're just fresh off the CELTA, you have this kind of mentality.
Yes.
And I'm not saying it's wrong or bad or anything, but it's an initial teacher training. So when you start looking at this from a more practical perspective, you're working with learners in a certain context, in a certain country, doing specific type of course. It gives you the opportunity to reassess what you learned in the CELTA, think it through. Can this work? And if it can't, why not? And what can I do to overcome that? And obviously with the observations and the amount of lesson planning I had to go through, that was also great, because it basically helped me later on when I started doing the Delta, because I've had like the basics set, and I was very confident when I started doing the Delta, especially module 2. I wasn't afraid of standing in the classroom or getting observed or getting feedback on my observations. So yeah, I'm definitely happy that I did this program.
Yeah, I'm putting a question actually in the chat box asking whether or not people who are joining us felt supported when they first entered the classroom. Trying to write it quickly. Classroom practice. Maybe people can give us some ideas about how they felt when they, I think some people may not have gone down the CELTA route, they may have gone down other routes, of course. Okay, so let's get on and move into the topic of discussion, which is obviously going to be assessment, which I know you're really passionate about, and I know you've got a lot of experience in. I guess the first question is, let's think quite broadly to start with. Why is assessing students' language development important? Is it important?
Well, I've always asked myself the same question. Ever since I was a student, I've always asked myself, why are we being assessed in the first place? And why do I have to prove myself to people? Kind of a philosophical kind of thinking, but I always hated it, to be honest, primarily because of the amount of importance that parents, society, that's how they value someone's worth, kind of, especially at the secondary stage, where it's like, this is now you have to prove, okay, whether you can join the university of your dreams or not. And it's very important here in Egypt, especially that people actually have to pay a lot of money in order to reach that stage and get to where they want. Now, assessment is definitely important, whether we like it or not. But I think the question should be is, are we doing it correctly? Are we actually helping our learners beyond assessment? Or what do we do with the results? Like, is there something we do with the results, or it's just a result and that's it? Is there any kind of research post-assessment that people conduct in order to change something that they have been doing along the years wrong? So these are the things we should be asking ourselves, really.
So I think the answer perhaps is then, so yes, it's definitely important to assess students' language development along the way. But it sounds like you're saying that we need to have, I guess, a discussion, not just me and you, but a wider discussion around the purpose, I guess, of why we're assessing them. And that the purpose there could be different purposes around why we do assessment. One, as you mentioned, could be that you do an assessment at the end of secondary school to prove you have the language requirements to be able to study at the next level and help move on academically. And I had a follow-up question, which was, do you think we sometimes focus a bit too much on assessment here in MENA? But actually, perhaps the question then would be a bit more focused. do you think we focus sometimes too much on summative assessment here in MENA?
Yeah,
Is
definitely.
that partly what we're trying to say?
Yeah, yeah. It's definitely, like I said, why people are learning in the first place. They're not learning for, like, given the choice, students, especially the younger generations, why else? They wouldn't want to learn in the first place. And I think this goes beyond assessment. It's the concept of education. But basically, like, we dread it. Some people are like, they have phobias of assessment. So we're not really helping our students. We're just putting them in the machine, and we're expecting the machine to produce some kind of product.
Hmm. Yeah, and there's this. It's interesting because you said that you're talking about students who have phobias, students who fear assessment, who don't do very well in assessment, and that has an impact on their learning. There's a correlation there. But actually, the same is true the other way around. There are some students who are just have a natural inclination towards assessment. They just,
Yeah,
it seems to make sense to them. And it's not necessarily that they're doing better in their learning. They just seem
mm,
to get that, well, this is a gap fill. I just do this and this, and I'm probably going to get the answer right. There's
exactly.
this kind of, and as they go through the educational system, I think when you mentioned secondary, that gap pushes wider and wider and wider. I think you either fall into the
Exactly.
camp of I get more and more fearful, and I feel like I'm failing more and more and more, and I'm
Yeah,
less invested in my own learning. Or you're the other way where you're like, I can breeze through this. I don't need to do any preparation. I will get my A because I'm pretty good at it. So yeah, I think
yeah,
that happens quite a lot. So this, I think, really is the conversation around summative assessment, and this, like you said, this very cultural focus on
mm,
certificates, grades,
yeah,
setting students up for practicing the exams, this type of thing.
exactly.
Okay, did you want to add anything there before I move on?
No, let's go.
That's okay. Okay. So we've talked quite a lot there about summative assessment. So we also have, so this I would say is assessment of learning. This is kind of at the end, you do something and then you test to see whether or not a student is capable
Yeah,
of what they're supposed to have learned. And then
yeah.
on the other side of the spectrum, you've got assessment for learning. So perhaps you
Mm.
could talk us a little bit about the difference between assessment of learning and assessment for learning.
Yeah, sure. Well, assessment of learning is basically the traditional sense of assessment that everyone has gone through at some point in their life. It's basically a way to measure a student's understanding through either proficiency test, like for speaking about English, like the IELTS exam or the TOEFL, and of course tests and such. Um, and it's a process where the student is not directly involved and the teacher is the only one controlling the whole thing, and test makers and so on. And at the end, you need to prove that you have achieved a certain score, or in order to like travel abroad or do your master's degree or something like that. So that's the traditional sense of assessment. Nothing happens after that, like I said. You just take the test, get a score, that's it. Whereas with assessment for learning, both the teacher and the student are involved in the process. The teacher gauges where the students are, what kind of gaps in their knowledge they have, and then sets to try to help them achieve that. So it's like a cycle where the students are, where they want to go, and what they need to do in order to get there. And this happens through like what we call formative assessment. You can do peer assessment, self-assessment, get feedback from the students, give feedback to the students. So it's a two-way relationship rather than just the student being someone just answering a bunch of questions on an exam paper.
Yeah.
And with assessment for learning, you can help the students also outside or beyond the classroom. You can help them become independent learners. So which one of them do we do more? That's the question. And in my own experience, I think I've done a little bit of both. There wasn't much reliance on assessment of learning. However, that's something that happened to me, I think, when I was, well, you know, when I was doing the CELTA, for example, I was being, it's a formal training. But of course, like I said, there doesn't have to be a need for us to separate between the two. Like, why can't we just combine both? And like I said, especially if you're not trained enough to think that way, if you're at the early years of your teaching experience, and depending on the context, you can get to easily fall into the trap of just assessing your students.
Yeah.
And when people think about giving students feedback, even after they have done their assessments, it's a very rigid kind of feedback where the student doesn't really know where to go from there. Well, you got this, you should take more practice tests in order to improve your performance next time round. That really isn't much of feedback.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, cool. So, like I said, summative assessment is the testing of learning at the end. I guess seeing whether or not we've ticked the boxes along the way, and students can use the language that we've presented to them, that they've practiced. It's, I guess if you think about it as an analogy, it's like if you think about sports, it would be like the competition. It's the end.
Yeah.
You get one chance. You need to perform at that particular time, and however you do will inform whether you do well or not. Formative assessment, it sounds like, I guess we can think of it as informative assessment, as it informs the process along the way. Actually, you said a few nice things, actually, because the episode that we had earlier this week was on learner autonomy. And actually, this feeds into this a lot, right? It's about making students more active in the learning process. So getting them, like you say, to self-reflect, to do peer feedback, support each other, be more collaborative, all of these types of things, getting them more involved.
Exactly.
And using that as a way of giving them more confidence, and lots of other things that go into that as well, I think. So yeah, okay, so assessment for learning is more ongoing, and it's probably interesting that I think a lot of the activities involved in assessment for learning are the types of activities that teachers probably already do. A lot of them are kind of game-based, interactive types of activities. I guess it's just thinking a little bit about them informing next steps, I guess, collecting data from activities rather than just doing the game for the purpose of practicing a particular language point, for example. Yes, this game is going to practice this grammar point, but am I unconsciously or subconsciously seeing which students are doing better, which students are struggling, and then using that to inform what tasks I give them next? Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the challenges I had to try to overcome is the fact that students don't know how to self-assess. Like, they always like raise their eyebrows at me when I ask them, can you evaluate your own skills, like in terms of listening, writing, speaking? And they didn't understand the question. Like, how can I do that? It's the teacher's job to tell me what my level is. Which is sad, really, because like I was dealing with adults, like, and not teens, like adults, like maybe early 30s, late 40s. They didn't know how to self-assess. So that was a big gap in their knowledge that I had to fill. I had to teach them how to think about evaluating themselves through specific tasks.
So while we're on that, Oh, go on. I was going to say, while we're on that point, because somebody's put a comment in the
Mm,
chat box, which is they're actually asking for if we can advise any strategies for this self-assessment, self-monitoring. I think what's really important is that uh, students, like you just said, are not going to just get it. Like we think as a teacher, as a thinking human, that self-assessment is something that we could do quite naturally. But actually, when it comes to self-assessment in a learning, in an educational environment, it needs to be trained. Those questions are too broad for them to engage
yeah,
with. So I guess the strategies are, and perhaps we can find some strategies from some of the courses, because I know there's some really good examples. I deal a lot with the primary courses, and I know there's some really nice activities which really scaffold and support the student in reflecting in a particular way. It doesn't just say, what did you think about this unit? And that's super broad. It actually gives them some focus around how to self-assess. But from your own personal experience, what kinds of strategies help students to self-assess?
Well, I think one of the simplest of ways, and it's a start, it's not something you have to always do in this exact way. Like you said, in course books, some course books, I recall at the end of every unit, there would be like a kind of a checklist where students have to tick against a certain criteria, reflecting on the learning aims of the entire units. For example, on a scale from 1 to 5, how confident are you in using the present perfect simple, for example? So it's a bunch of questions using a checklist. So you can
Yeah.
start by using a checklist if the context you are working with, people do not understand the concept of self-assessment, and you can then build from there.
Yeah.
That's one way.
Yeah, I've seen them. We have can do statements. They're very popular in course books. In fact, I would say to add to the strategy, I think it's important that you perhaps show students at the beginning of the unit the self-assessment at the end. So this is where you are now. This is where you're hoping to get to. And then when they get there, it's not like, oh, now I'm going to assess and think back. It's in their mind as they go through the unit. And then when they get there,
Yes.
and I think really I mean, if you're not doing it that much at the moment, I guess the simplest strategy would be, as you just said, to just make it a scale from 1 to 5. How
Yeah.
confident are you now? Are you 1? Are you 3? Are you 4? How many people in the class are 3s? How many of the people in the class are 5s? Can the people who are 5s tell the people who are 2s, why they're
Yes.
5 and how they got there? And again, that builds into this learner autonomy, collaboration mindset, I think, within the classroom.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, nice. Okay, good. So we've talked about assessment of learning, assessment for learning. We've talked a little bit about assessment in this particular context. Let's think about exam preparation, because I know you've got a lot of experience here. So, I mean, in your own opinion, what makes for, I guess, let's think of it from both sides, the student side and the teacher side. What makes for good exam preparation from the student's point of view? But what makes for a good exam preparation course? Or it might not be a course because some people might not teach courses, or they might not have courses if they teach primary or secondary, but what can they implement in the classroom, I guess? So what makes for good exam preparation, in your opinion?
Well, in my own experience, from a student's point of view, students' main interest in taking an exam prep course is feedback. They want to get as much feedback from the teachers as possible in order to know what to do with that feedback, which is like what we said before about assessment for learning. From a teacher's point of view, it's a matter of consolidating where the students are now, what kind of strength and weaknesses do they have in terms of the 4 language skills, for example, and then building from there. And teachers need to be wary of falling into the trap of assessment of learning. Like I said before, you can easily find yourself going through practice tests every time
Yeah.
you meet your students without actually developing their skills. And I've like, unfortunately, I've fallen into this trap before. But at a certain point, especially after I did my Delta, I started thinking beyond the exam strategies and techniques I was trying to teach my students. I found that I was almost always trying to help the students get acquainted with, and I'm speaking about the IELTS exam, for example, always trying to help them understand what the question really wants you to do, or how the question wants to be answered. Not exactly helping them develop the actual skill or the sub skills that they need in order to answer this specific question. So, like I said before, it's gauging where the students are. Like, for example, students who are taking a certain test in order to get a certain score. That again helps you create a certain syllabus to help this student. But in terms of language development, an exam preparation course is really essential. And often at times where you go take a course, like a 5-week course or a 1-month course, sadly, there's no language development in these courses. It all solely focus on the idea of exam prep techniques and strategies, some kind of feedback given, that's it. There's no language development involved, because we rely on the student, that the student have already done a certain kind of like maybe general English course before they join the exam prep course. And then we just move on from there.
Yeah, and one of the problems, I mean, when I worked at the British Council, I guess one of the problems that always arose was that students quite often came to exam preparation courses like IELTS what we would always say was too late. Like, you know, they come and they say, I need to move up a band. Okay, when is your test? Next Friday. And
exactly.
You're like, okay. So then you're shoehorned almost into this. Well, I'll try and give you as many tips to bump you up, or to avoid those kind of those ceilings, those benchmarks that they quite often fall down on. You know, not meeting word counts, these types of things. If you look at the rubrics, you know, there's all sorts of things that are there to trip them up. So yeah, you kind of just did that. And I wonder whether or not, because we're talking about courses, but it also made me think about exam preparation in the kind of schooling sector, because I know here there's also this approach of, you know, they get to kind of grades, especially think about grades either 6 or grades 11, 10 and 11. And it's like, we just move into kind of exam preparation mode. Like language development doesn't happen now. We've got like 6 months of just like pounding you with practice exams. I think that happens a lot here.
That happens here as well. Yeah, especially during the secondary stage. Like students have to, before the school starts 6 months in advance, they have to start booking exam preparation courses in order to help them pass the test, not necessarily understand the subject. So there's heavy reliance on exam techniques and strategies, or even just taking practice tests. So as many practice tests as you can take, that will guarantee you getting the score that you want. And like I said, like teachers end up just testing their students, not really teaching them how to think or how to deal with a certain task or how to even develop their skills.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a few things I think we can reflect on there. I mean, I wouldn't say that taking practice tests is bad in any way, and I don't think you would either. I think it's important for students to see an assessment that they're going to be doing, see the structure, types of questions, and part of that is learning the skill of approaching a particular assessment. Let's say IELTS, for example. You know, what is it you're going to see? How are you going to interact with the speaking examiner? You know. And part of that can be, I guess, the strategy of building confidence and breaking down nerves, because when we're thinking about assessment, nerves, phobias, lack of confidence can impact on your grade, right? A
Yeah,
lot.
of course. Of course.
So there's these skills and strategies, but I think you're right. Trying to take a step back from just kind of overly hitting them with lots of practice tests. And I guess mirroring that or mapping that with language development at the same time. I think some of the exam preparation courses, I used to use a Cambridge one that I think got better at that, helping develop language at the same time as setting them up for success in particular exam.
Well, most course books are designed in this way, but what really happens in real life doesn't always mimic or mirror what the course book involves in terms of language development. I mean, because naturally, practically speaking, there isn't much time, and the student is not really or doesn't have the time or doesn't have the mindset in order to think about developing their skill within exam preparation unless they see this kind of language development fulfilled in a certain task. So for example, when we teach the writing task 1 in the IELTS prep courses, writing task 1 academic, I mean, the language that the students need in order to fulfill the task is completely novel to them. They are not acquainted with this language of describing figures and graphs and so on. So when they see that that's the only way that they need this language in order to do this task properly and get a good score, then they see the relationship, they see that the connection. But other than that, in terms, for example, of the reading or the speaking exam, it's difficult to do any kind of language development there. So unless you already have good reading skills before you took this exam prep course, unless you already have a variety of vocabulary, there won't be enough time to do that during the course.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. They're always limited by time. And I guess that perhaps highlights the need, I guess, for more collaboration at the kind of teacher level, not just collaboration within a particular school, but I don't think I brought this up before, but collaboration across learning journeys. Because in order for them, let's say that task 1, in order for them to have those skills, they need to practice that skill at secondary, but they need to also be exposed to it in primary. And so it's not when they get there, it's not when they get to 18 and they're going to take an IELTS that you're introduced to graphs. So and things like basic child-friendly infographics, comparing, contrasting, all of these types of things, opinions, we introduce them to a primary level. So there's I think in order for that to shift, there needs to be a focus very early on in terms of setting them up for the things that they're going to need later, so that when they're in their late teens or they're young adults, they don't have to learn that stuff. They can focus on better usage of language and how they're going to attack that particular so it's a kind of holistic approach, I guess, that perhaps is needed. I don't think just focusing in on exam preparation courses for young adults might not get that far. I don't know, that's just a feeling.
Yeah, well, I did teach the IGCSE English syllabus to a group of young learners before. I did it once. Sadly, it was very it was heavily reliant on the concept of practice tests, past papers. There wasn't enough time to help the students even reflect on the learning experience, and that's something I think is crucial, because students at this level, from this age group, are always worried about what their parents think about them, whether they're going to pass their tests or not. So I think there needs to also be a reconciliation with the parents, or setting their expectations. But unfortunately, in my context, parents get to be a little bit defensive about facing the facts. So, what was I going to say? Yeah, like you said, Nathan, it's important early on to equip our students with life skills. Such kinds of exams like the IELTS, the questions are designed to help make sure that you understand how to deal with English in different situations, how to take notes in a lecture, how
Yeah.
to take notes while listening to someone on the phone. So if students were acquainted with this early on during the early learning stages,
Yeah.
when they are young learners, I think that's going to help them a lot later on in their future.
Yeah.
So
I
that's the
totally agree. Yeah. And just things like that. I wonder how many teachers practice note taking with primary students when other students are doing things in the classroom. I I, I would imagine probably almost never. I mean,
yeah,
I've never seen it. So it's
yeah,
interesting, those
yeah.
type of,
I
maybe they're doing a
agree.
presentation and students just write down a couple of feedback notes.
Mm.
We quite often do it in circle time type activities as it's kind of spoken. They present, does anyone have anything to say? But in terms of taking notes throughout and then feeding that back is a peer assessment task. It'll be really interesting. Maybe I need to do more observations and or talk to
Yeah,
more
I,
teachers.
I think
Maybe they do.
I I I think I've never observed that. It's if anything, teachers would do a dictogloss activity or like a full-on dictation, but not allow the students to take notes.
Mm,
Unless they're doing one of those listening tasks where you have to like maybe listen and tick what the speakers have said, something like that. But yeah, that rarely happens with young learners, I think.
yeah, I think that more. I was thinking more the other end when they get to the productive tasks, whether other students are doing those kind of and it doesn't have to be complex. It can be very simple. And again, you could set it up. It could be purposeful. You could give them that, the options that they could choose. Were they speaking clearly, yes or no? And then how many people chose yes?
Yes.
How many students chose no? Very simple. It doesn't have to be overly
Yeah.
complicated, but it just needs to have a purpose. But like you just said, it gets students practicing those early types of skills that they're going to need. Yeah, really nice. And we kind of moved on to the final question. I know we're running out of time, which was what else do we need to support students with beyond language in order for them to be successful? I mentioned confidence, which certainly
Mm.
when I was doing IELTS was a really big thing for me. I mean, I come from that type of psychology background. So I was very much into really giving students as much confidence as possible so that when they're there,
Yeah.
they feel like they can perform well and achieve
Mm.
because of that. I think that does have an impact. You
Yeah.
mentioned another really nice one, which was improving communications with parents, bringing parents into the conversation, helping parents, I think, to see assessment differently, because a parent is not trained in education. They're not
Yeah.
teachers. So they can only reflect on what they went through, and their experience of education will be what it is that perhaps we're trying to break down. So that's what they bring to the conversation. They're bringing that mindset of, certificates are important, grades are important. And if my student's not the top of the class, how am I going to show them off at the next parents
Yeah.
crunch type of thing? So what else? Any other things? Any other things that are important
Yeah.
around students?
Yeah, I think that will take me back to what I told you at the beginning of this chat, that my primary school English teacher taught me how to think. And that's what I've been trying to do during my years of teaching. I've been trying to teach my students how to think, and that also again ties with the idea of learner autonomy and helping students getting to grips with their own learning journey and helping them understand that you're not learning in order to get assessed, and that assessment is just a means to an end, but not an end in and of itself. But that's mentality shifting, and I think it will take a lot of time and patience from educators in order to implement that. And if they're not themselves, if they don't believe in that themselves, I don't think they will be able to convince the students with it as well.
Mm. Yeah, and you really, I mean, you're making me think a lot about all of those VTRs. Well, my mind just went blank. Thinking routines, working on with students on thinking and routines around thinking, getting them to realize why they think that way. So, and
Yeah,
again, that's part of autonomous learning, getting them to see that learning is strategy based rather than memorization based. So,
true.
okay, you came to this conclusion, but what was the process of getting there? Not just,
E-
I mean, I guess that's what
Exactly.
breaks down assessment, right? Because assessment
Yeah.
is, like you said, is the end. Did you get to the goal? Did you manage to solve the equation? Well, yes, that's good, but how did you get there? And how can you use that strategy in another scenario? Because that's taking
Yes.
learning under your own initiative. And so thinking, yeah, definitely feeds into that. And then hopefully that all kind of comes together um, in terms of, students seeing a bigger picture, I guess, about what learning is about and why it's important for them to be interested in it. If you ask any teacher, do you have this lifelong love of learning? They'll give you a whole range of examples of the fact that they feel like that. So we want to kind of pass that into students, right? This love of learning, and it comes from, I think, breaking down that learning is just there to get you to the end. It's actually something more than that. It's about interaction, collaboration. It's about communicating with other people, finding out things, learning about stuff, having interests, being able to explore your own passions in new ways with new people that you wouldn't be able to if you didn't have that language. Um,
Hmm.
nice. Sorry, I just
Exactly.
got very passionate there.
No, yeah, definitely. It's a very passionate topic for all of us educators, I think. Um, um, I think also what makes this either a successful experience or not for both the teachers and the students is the kind of ongoing communication that takes place between teachers and students. And like you said, it's okay. It's as simple as very minimal teaching practices, tweaks that we can do inside the classroom with our students. Conversation at the beginning of the lesson, in the middle of the lesson, and at the end. It's not because what teachers are always worried about is like their TTT, and they think that all TTT is bad. Well, not really. A simple question like, okay, why do you guys think we are doing this task in the first place? There's a lot of conversation. Like you can really get to see how the students are thinking during those moments and help them fix how they're thinking.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a whole range of things I think we can do, and those types of questions are really important with students. Even just things like, we've got 2 weeks. We're going to be doing this unit on this topic. This is let's say, a project that we're supposed to be doing at the end. Is that what you want to do? Would you change it? Or how would you guys approach this? And then adapting as you kind of go. Maybe you will still end up with that project because you're guiding them towards it, but you've
Yeah,
kind of plucked out of their minds things that they're interested in, and you can work with that and feed that into the activities that they do. Oh, they said this, so I will adapt this activity so those students can perhaps thrive a little bit better. Yeah, loads
yeah,
of that, I think. Okay, we're running
yeah.
out of time. We've run out of time. We always like to finish with some teaching tips. I mean, we've given loads of tips and advice, I think, throughout the discussion there. But any favorites, tips for teachers based on your years of educational experience?
Um, I would say don't be afraid to challenge your students. Um, I've found that we're always underestimating our students' potential, especially when we teach beginner level students. Um, why can't we use authentic material with them? Why do we always have to grade the text? Why can't we like just put them in the game and see what they're capable of? I think the moment you start challenging your students and not underestimating them, you can get really surprised with the results.
Yeah, and there's loads of again strategies for that. I mean, I think if people or teachers out there quite or predominantly use a PPP methodology, perhaps challenge yourself to try different types of methodologies. Do a teach test type of methodology, a couple of units, and see what impact that has. Challenge them with certain types of projects. Yeah, give them opportunities to personalize and see what they can come up with. Like I say, challenge them. A flipped classroom, again, we mentioned that last week. You know, this can challenge them because they have to think about it ahead of the lesson, come prepared with something perhaps. So yeah, all of that challenge hopefully will inspire them and push them a little bit further and be less reliant on the teacher. I think that's probably what you're saying there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, nice. It's a lovely tip. I like it. Okay, anyone in the chat, if you want to give any of your tips around assessment, please feel free to do so as well. We'd love to hear from some of the things that you guys said. There was one question from Hanan who was asking about how, I'm trying to interpret the question, how we can teach them extra curriculum things outside of the language. I think this is, so perhaps we touched on that a little bit. I think it's something like we're only connected with them at school, so helping them around with it extra additional stuff is actually it's quite complicated, which I think you touched on a little bit. I don't know if you've got anything else you want to say.
I was gonna say that I think Hanan's question is driven from the fact that maybe I'm not sure, her context is students don't like to do things outside the classroom, or they always come up with excuses that they're busy or something, or they don't see the point. Yeah, so I think that ties back again with the idea of if the student has a goal, they're well informed of this goal, and their teacher is involved with them in helping them trying to achieve this goal, the cycle where the students are, where they want to go, and what to do in order to get them there. I think this is when you can build trust and help the students. Whenever you give them a certain task, whether inside the classroom or outside the classroom, they can get to see their connection, their relationship. I'm doing this because I can do this later and I will be able to pass my exam and achieve my dreams.
Yeah, so there's a few things there, right? Rapport is one, goal setting and student-centered learning, I guess, is a big part of that. If the learning is student-centered, then hopefully they're more engaged with that process and the content because they're co-creating it, perhaps. And then they will naturally take that beyond the classroom, because if you set them a task that they can personalize, go home and find a video to come back and present to the classroom on that you like around this topic, these types of things is more interesting from them than here's a practice test, go home and do it, bring it back and I'll mark it and give you a 3 out of 10. So thinking about how we approach certain activities, making them student-centered. Yeah, and really nice.
Yeah.
Excellent. So thank you so much again, Sarah, for joining us today and for sharing so much knowledge and experience and for all the tips and advice that you've given us throughout the podcast. For those people who are interested in learning more, one of our advancing learning themes here at Macmillan is advancing assessment for the future. So if you go to macmillanenglish.com and look for assessment for the future, the theme, there's lots of blog articles, there's some webinars related to that particular topic. So if you want to extend in your own time this particular topic and learn more, there's, I think, a ton of stuff on One Stop English as well. And I think there's actually some practical classroom activities broken into segments. So there's some for primary, there's some for teens, there's some for young adults. So you can actually find some things that you can use in the classroom to help embed assessment for learning more in the classroom without it taking any more time. It'll be related to the topics that you're already doing. So I hope that is helpful. Okay, my mint and turmeric, which was actually really nice. I actually quite enjoyed this tea. I'm very surprised. I was not looking forward to it, I'm going to be honest. But it's come to an end. So today's podcast has also sadly come to an end. I'm sure Sarah and I could have talked about this topic for the rest of the day.
Yes.
But Sarah, I'd like to thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And thanks to everyone who has joined us. I know there was a few comments in the chat box. If I missed anything, I'll try and pick it up on the Facebook page. But thanks for joining us, those of you who have been with us, having a listen. And we hope you enjoyed today's discussion. Please do go and check out our other ELT Time MENA episodes on the MENA PD Academy website, menapdacademy.com. I'm going to be traveling for the next couple of weeks. So the next episode is planned for the weekend of the 14th of September. And we're going to be welcoming SARAH Rajab, who's joining us from Syria. And she's going to be talking to us about her strategies and ideas around creating really engaging, positive, and interactive pre-primary classroom, which I'm really excited to talk to her about. I talked to her in our pre-podcast meeting, and she's so passionate about this. So it's going to be a really like uplifting, positive podcast in September. If anyone's interested in being a guest yourself on the ELT Time MENA podcast, please get in touch with me. We're always happy to have people talking passionately about the things that they're interested in and providing that platform to you all. For now, though, from Sarah and myself, we wish you all and all of your students the very best for the upcoming academic year, which I'm sure for many of you is just starting now. And we'll look forward to seeing you again in September. Sarah, have a lovely weekend.
Thank you, Nathan. Same to you.
And I will see everybody again soon. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.